Welcome to Soft Contact. We hope this story helps you rest easy tonight, wherever you are. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're listening from, what time it is there, and what you think about this topic. Tonight we're gathering accounts from people who looked up at the wrong moment and saw something that changed everything. These are memories whispered in the dark, written in journals that were hidden away, recorded on tapes that were never meant to be shared. Each one describes lights that moved in ways physics couldn't explain, shapes that defied every rule we thought we understood, encounters that left marks on skin and deeper marks on memory. The moments when the sky opened up and showed us we are not alone, and perhaps never have been. Chapter 1. Highway Lights. I was driving home from my second shift at the printing plant, somewhere around 3:30 in the morning. This was back in 1997, before cell phones were everywhere, when a breakdown on a rural highway meant you were truly alone. The road cut through Indiana farmland, flat and empty, the kind of landscape where you can see headlights coming from 5 miles away. There were no headlights that night, except mine. I had the radio on, tuned to some AM station playing old country music, the volume low enough that it was just texture, just company. The dashboard lights gave off their familiar green glow. My coffee from the gas station sat in the cup holder, still warm. Everything was routine, familiar, safe. That's what I remember most. How utterly normal everything felt right up until the moment it wasn't. The light came first as a glow on the horizon, like dawn breaking in the wrong direction. I was heading west and the light was coming from the north, a soft white radiance that grew brighter as I watched. My first thought was a farm with floodlights, maybe a prison or a factory I'd somehow never noticed before. But the light kept growing, expanding, and there was something wrong about the quality of it. Too clean, too white. Not the yellow sodium colour of artificial lights or the organic warmth of fire. Then I saw the source. It was moving across the fields, parallel to the highway, maybe half a mile out. Enormous. I'm talking about something the size of a football field, triangular, with lights at each corner that pulsed in a sequence that felt deliberate. White, then blue, then white again. The rhythm was perfect, mechanical, hypnotic. The craft moved at exactly my speed, 60 miles an hour, maintaining a precise distance from the road. I eased off the gas without thinking about it, some animal part of my brain making the decision before my conscious mind could catch up. The craft slowed with me. I accelerated and it matched my speed instantly. No lag, no adjustment period. It was tracking me. That's when the fear hit. Not the startled jump scare kind, but something deeper, colder. The fear that comes from understanding you're in a situation you have absolutely no control over. The craft shifted course, angling toward the highway. It crossed over the fields in complete silence. No engine roar, no wind noise. Nothing. When it passed directly over my truck, the interior lit up like someone had installed stadium lights in the cab. I could see every detail of the dashboard, the texture of the steering wheel cover, the dust particles floating in the air. The radio cut to static, a harsh white noise that filled the space, and I felt a pressure in my chest, in my head, like the air had become heavier. I wanted to stop. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over, to get out, to run into the fields and hide. But my hands wouldn't turn the wheel. I kept driving, straight and steady, while this thing hovered above me. I could see it through the windshield now, the underside of the craft, which wasn't smooth. There were structures there, geometric patterns, things that looked almost like machinery but organic somehow, flowing into each other in ways that hurt to look at. The pressure in my head intensified. I tasted copper, metallic and sharp. My vision blurred at the edges, and I thought I might pass out, might drive straight off the road into a ditch. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the craft shot upward. Not a gradual ascent. It was there and then it wasn't. Gone so fast my eyes couldn't track the movement. Just a streak of light punching through the clouds and disappearing into the night sky. The radio came back on mid-song, the dashboard lights steady, everything normal. I was still driving 60 miles an hour down an empty highway. My coffee was still warm in the cup holder, but my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over. I sat on the shoulder with the engine running, gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand what had just happened. When I finally looked at the clock on the dashboard, 45 minutes had passed. The encounter felt like maybe 5 minutes, 10 at the absolute most. But the clock didn't lie. 45 minutes gone, and I had no idea where they'd gone. I checked the odometer. I'd driven exactly 18 miles, which at 60 miles an hour worked out to about 18 minutes. The math didn't work. The time didn't work. Nothing worked. I made it home eventually, pulled into my driveway just as the real dawn was starting to lighten the eastern sky. My wife was already up, making coffee, and she asked why I was so late. I told her there was traffic. She looked at me like I was insane. Traffic at 4 a.m. on a country highway. But she didn't push it. I went upstairs and tried to sleep and couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that underside, those geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow, and I felt that pressure in my chest again. I went back to that highway a week later, during daylight, trying to find something. Evidence, I guess. Some sign that it had been real. The fields looked normal. Corn stubble and bare earth. No burn marks or landing sites or anything unusual. I drove the route slowly, checking the odometer, timing myself. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except I knew what I'd seen. I knew what had happened. Even if I couldn't explain the missing time, couldn't understand why the craft had chosen to follow me, or what it had wanted. That was 26 years ago. I still drive that highway sometimes, usually during the day, but occasionally at night when insomnia gets the better of me. I watch the northern sky. I keep the radio off so I can hear if the silence comes again. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes I see lights moving in ways that lights shouldn't move. Distant but unmistakable. And I wonder if they remember me. If somewhere in whatever consciousness drives those crafts, there's a record of that night. A file. A note. The man in the truck on the Indiana highway, tracked and studied and released, changed forever by 5 minutes that lasted 45. Chapter 2. The Clearing. My brother and I went camping in the Cascade Range in August of 2003. We'd been planning the trip for months, just the two of us, a chance to get away from jobs and responsibilities, and the noise of ordinary life. We hiked in deep, maybe 12 miles from the nearest trailhead, found a clearing beside a creek, where the water ran clear over smooth stones, and the trees formed a natural cathedral around us. The first 2 days were perfect. Textbook camping. We fished, cooked over an open fire, talked about nothing important. At night the stars were so bright they looked fake, like someone had overdone it with the special effects. We saw satellites moving across the sky, those slow, steady points of light that cross from horizon to horizon in a few minutes. We saw planes, their blinking navigation lights giving them away. We knew what belonged up there and what didn't. The third night started normally. We made dinner, cleaned up, sat by the fire as the light faded from the sky. The forest was loud with its evening sounds. Insects, birds settling in for the night, the creek providing constant white noise in the background. My brother was telling some story about his ex-girlfriend. I was only half listening, watching the fire pop and spark. The silence came like a curtain dropping. 1 second the forest was alive with sound, the next it was completely, utterly quiet. Not peaceful quiet, aggressive quiet, the kind of silence that feels like pressure against your eardrums. My brother stopped talking mid-sentence. We both sat there, listening to nothing, and I felt the hair on my arm stand up. Then came the light. It didn't come from above like I'd expected from every UFO story I'd ever heard. It came from between the trees, from the forest itself, as if something behind the tree line had switched on a floodlight. But the quality was wrong. The light was too white, too clean, and it didn't cast shadows the right way. The trees were illuminated, but not from any single direction. The light was just there, everywhere, sourceless. We stood up at the same time, both of us moving to the edge of the clearing, trying to see what was producing the light. That's when I saw them, 3 figures standing at the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. Tall, well over 6 feet, maybe 7. Thin in a way that looked wrong, like their proportions had been stretched. I couldn't make out details because the light was behind them, silhouetting them, but I could see they weren't moving. They were perfectly, unnaturally still. My brother grabbed my arm. His grip was painfully tight. He was seeing them too. We stood there frozen, watching these figures watch us, and I became aware of a sound. Not a sound I heard with my ears exactly. More like a vibration I felt in my jaw, in my teeth. A frequency just below or above normal hearing, pulsing slowly, rhythmically. One of the figures moved. It didn't walk. There was no leg movement, no shift of weight. It just glided forward, smooth and continuous, like it was on a track. It came closer, to the edge of the firelight, and I got my first clear look at it. The head was too large, bulbous, with eyes that caught the firelight and reflected it back like an animal's but wrong. The eyes were too big, too dark, taking up too much of the face. The body was thin, skeletal almost, covered in something that looked like grey-blue skin but might have been a suit. I couldn't tell. The arms hung at its sides, too long, and the hands had too many fingers. Or not enough. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The image kept sliding away from me, refusing to solidify into something I could understand. It stood there at the edge of our firelight, watching us, not moving, not speaking, just watching with those enormous dark eyes. The vibration in my jaw intensified, and I tasted metal, copper, and electricity. My brother made a sound, a whimper, and I realised I was making sounds too, involuntary noises I couldn't control. The other two figures glided forward to join the first. They formed a line at the edge of the clearing, 3 of them, identical in their wrongness. The light behind them pulsed brighter, and I felt a pull, a compulsion to walk toward them. My legs started moving without my permission, carrying me forward one step, then another. My brother tackled me. We went down hard on the dirt and pine needles, and the impact jarred something loose in my head. The compulsion broke. I could think again, could control my body again. We scrambled backward, away from the figures, toward our tent. They didn't follow. They just stood there watching, that vibration humming through the air. My brother was saying something, his voice high and panicked. We have to go right now. I nodded. We grabbed what we could. Our packs, the tent still staked down. We left it. The sleeping bags, the cooking gear, the food, all of it abandoned. We had flashlights and we ran. Running through a forest at night is suicide. You trip over roots, crash into low branches, turn your ankle on hidden stones. We did all of that. I fell twice, hard enough to tear my jeans and scrape my palms raw. My brother fell more. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. Behind us the light was still there, visible through the trees, following us. Not chasing. It maintained distance, but definitely following. Tracking our progress through the forest. We hit the trail by pure luck, my flashlight catching the worn path in the beam. We followed it in the dark, jogging when the terrain allowed, walking fast when it didn't. The light stayed behind us for maybe 2 miles, then it was just gone. The forest sounds returned all at once, startlingly loud after that oppressive silence. We didn't stop moving until we reached the trailhead. My truck was still there, covered in dew, untouched. We threw our packs in the back, and I drove us to the nearest town, a tiny place with 1 gas station and a diner. We sat in the diner parking lot as the sun came up, neither of us speaking, both of us shaking. When we finally talked about it, hours later we realised our stories didn't quite match. I remembered 3 figures. My brother swore there were 4. I remembered them at the tree line. He remembered them closer, almost at the fire. The details slid around, refused to settle into a single coherent narrative. But we both remembered the eyes. We both remembered the pull, the compulsion to walk toward them. We both remembered running. We reported the abandoned gear to the ranger station, said we'd been spooked by what we thought was a bear. They asked if we wanted to go back for our stuff. We said no. We never went back. That tent is probably still there, stakes rusted, fabric rotted, a marker of the night we ran from something we still can't explain. My brother doesn't camp anymore, won't even go for a day hike. He lives in Seattle now, surrounded by concrete and people and electric lights. I still camp sometimes, but never alone, and never in the Cascades. And I watch the tree lines carefully when the sun goes down, looking for light that comes from the wrong direction, for figures that stand too still, for the moment when the forest sounds cut out and the silence presses down like a physical weight. Chapter 3. The Bedroom Visitor. I need to describe my bedroom first so you understand why this affected me the way it did. I lived on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building in Portland, one of those converted warehouses with high ceilings and big windows. My bedroom window faced an alley, brick wall across from me, maybe 15 feet away. No direct sightlines to the street. To get to my window, you'd need a very tall ladder, or you'd need to be on the roof of the building across the alley. It wasn't a place where light just wandered in from traffic or street lamps. This was December 2011. I'd been living there for about 8 months. I knew the ambient light patterns of my room, the way headlights from the street 2 blocks over sometimes bounced off the brick wall and created moving shadows on my ceiling. I knew the orange glow from the security light mounted on the building across the alley. I knew what my room looked like at 3 in the morning because I'd battled insomnia for years. That night I woke up from a dreamless sleep feeling like I'd been called, like someone had spoken my name directly into my ear. I opened my eyes and my room was full of blue light. Not the blue of dawn, not the blue of a TV screen left on in another room. This was a pure, cold blue, sterile, almost medical. It filled the entire space uniformly. No source, no variation in intensity. Every object in my room was visible in perfect detail. I sat up in bed and saw it outside my window. A sphere, maybe 3 feet in diameter, hovering in the alley at eye level. The surface looked like liquid metal, constantly moving, swirling, catching and reflecting the blue light it was somehow producing. It rotated slowly, and as it turned I saw symbols or markings on the surface, geometric patterns that rearranged themselves, flowing from one configuration to another. I should have been terrified. I knew I should be terrified, but I felt calm, almost sedated, like I'd taken a tranquilizer. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to get back, to hide, but my body wasn't listening. I walked right up to the glass and put my hand against it, and the sphere moved closer, matching my movement, until it was inches from the window. The blue light intensified. I could feel warmth through the glass, subtle but real. The symbols on the sphere's surface began moving faster, the patterns becoming more complex, and I had the strangest sensation that it was communicating, showing me something, but I couldn't understand the language. It was like listening to music from an alien culture where even the basic scales were different from ours. Then I heard my name, not out loud, inside my head, clear and distinct, in a voice that wasn't my own and wasn't quite anyone's. It said my name, and then it said, "Come." Not a command, an invitation. The window in front of me wasn't locked. I never locked it because we were 3 floors up, and who locks a 3rd-floor window? I found my hand on the latch. That's when the fear broke through whatever calm had been imposed on me. My hand was on the latch, and I was about to open the window, about to climb out onto a narrow ledge 3 stories above an alley, and I didn't know why. I jerked my hand back like the latch was burning hot, and stumbled backward, falling over my desk chair, landing hard on the floor. The blue light vanished instantly. My room plunged into normal darkness, just the orange security light from across the alley providing faint illumination. I scrambled to my feet and looked out the window. The sphere was gone. The alley was empty. Everything was ordinary and still and quiet. I turned on every light in my apartment. I checked the locks on my door, even though whatever had been outside my window clearly didn't need to use doors. I made coffee at 3:30 in the morning and sat at my kitchen table drinking it, trying to process what had happened. My hand wouldn't stop shaking. Coffee slopped over the rim of the mug, pooling on the table. When dawn finally came, I went back to my bedroom and examined the window. No marks on the glass, no residue, no evidence of anything unusual. The brick wall across the alley looked the same as always. But when I looked down at my hand, the one I'd pressed against the window, I found a mark on my palm. A circle, maybe an inch in diameter, with a pattern inside it. Not burned into the skin, not bruised. Just there like a temporary tattoo, but I hadn't put it there. The pattern looked like the symbols I'd seen on the sphere, geometric and precise. I tried to wash it off. Soap, water, scrubbing until my palm was red and raw. The mark didn't fade. I covered it with a bandage and tried to forget about it, which was impossible. Every time I used my hand, I felt it there, a reminder of the night I almost climbed out a 3rd-floor window towards something I didn't understand. The mark faded over about 3 weeks, gradually lightening until it was barely visible. But it never disappeared completely. If you look at my palm now in bright light, you can still see it. Faint but there, a circular scar with a pattern inside. I've had doctors look at it. They ask if I burned myself. I say yes. It's easier than the truth. I moved out of that apartment 4 months later. The rent was too high anyway, I told people. But the real reason was that I couldn't sleep there anymore. Every night I'd lie in bed watching the window, waiting for the blue light to return, my hand clenched into a fist so I couldn't see the mark on my palm, waiting for my name to be called again in that voice that wasn't a voice. I still live in Portland, but on the ground floor now, interior bedroom with no windows. I sleep with a white noise machine to cover up silence, and I never, ever let myself fall into that calm feeling, that sense of peace that came over me when the sphere appeared. Because I know now it wasn't peace. It was something being done to me, some override of my basic survival instincts. And if I'd opened that window, I don't think I would have fallen. I think I would have stepped out into empty air and been caught, lifted, taken somewhere I wouldn't have come back from. Sometimes I dream about it. In the dreams I open the window, I step out onto the ledge and there's no fear, just that overwhelming calm. The sphere is there waiting, and I reach out to touch it. The surface is warm and alive and welcoming. I step off the ledge and I don't fall. I'm lifted up into the blue light, and I see the city falling away below me, getting smaller, and I feel something I can only describe as coming home. When I wake up from those dreams, my hand is always open, palm up, and I can see the mark clear and bright like it's fresh again. Then I blink and it's faint again, barely visible, a ghost of that night. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know why it chose my window, my bedroom, me. I don't know if I made the right choice by pulling away, or if I lost something by not following. But I know I can never tell this story with my real name attached. I know that 12 years later I still check the sky obsessively when I'm outside at night, looking for blue light, for spheres that shouldn't exist. And I know that somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and the confusion and the sleepless nights, there's a part of me that wants the window to light up again, that wants to hear my name called, that wants to step out into the emptiness and see where it would take me. That's the part that scares me most. Chapter 4. The Desert Encounter. I was stationed at a small radar installation in the Nevada desert, one of those places that doesn't officially exist on any map you can access publicly. This was 1989, toward the end of the Cold War, though we didn't know it was ending yet. My job was monitoring airspace, tracking anything that flew through our designated sector. Boring work most of the time. Weather balloons, commercial flights, the occasional military jet. We logged everything, reported anything unusual, spent most of our shifts drinking bad coffee and counting the hours until rotation. There were 4 of us on duty that night. Myself, 2 other enlisted men, and our commanding officer, a captain named Reese, who'd been at the installation longer than anyone else. We were 12 hours into a 24-hour shift, that dead zone around 2 in the morning when staying awake becomes an active battle. I was at the radar console, watching the green sweep go around and around, hypnotic and pointless. Then something appeared on the screen that shouldn't have been there. A contact, moving from west to east at a speed the radar clocked at just over 7,000 miles per hour. Way too fast for any aircraft we knew about. It was there for 1 sweep, 2 sweeps, 3. And then it stopped. Just stopped, hanging in the air about 60 miles from our position. I called it out to Reese. He came over and looked at the screen, frowned, checked the equipment calibration. Everything was functioning normally. The contact was still there, stationary now, a bright blip on the screen that pulsed with each sweep of the radar. He ordered me to log it and got on the radio to report to our command centre. While he was talking, the contact started moving again. Not in a straight line. It was making a pattern, geometric movements, perfect 90-degree turns, at speeds that should have torn any aircraft apart. Box pattern, then triangle, then a figure 8, all executed with mechanical precision. The radar was tracking something that was flying in ways nothing could fly. Reese ended his radio call and told us command was sending someone to check our equipment. They thought we had a malfunction. But we all saw the same thing on the screen. We watched that contact perform impossible manoeuvres for about 10 minutes, and then it started moving toward us. Straight line this time, covering ground at ridiculous speed, and in less than a minute it was directly overhead. Then every screen in the installation went dark. Total blackout. The radar died, the radio died, even the emergency lighting cut out. We were sitting in complete darkness in a bunker in the middle of the Nevada desert with no power, and something hovering above us that had just demonstrated capabilities beyond anything in our arsenal. Reese ordered us to stay calm, stay at our stations. I could hear him moving in the darkness, trying the manual phone line, cursing when it didn't work. One of the other men started praying quietly. I just sat there trying to slow my breathing, trying not to think about the fact that we were in a reinforced concrete bunker with blast doors, and this thing had killed our power like it was flipping a switch. The light came then, blue-white brilliant, streaming through the ventilation shafts and the narrow windows up near the ceiling line. It was bright enough to read by, casting harsh shadows across the equipment consoles. I looked up at the windows and saw the source. A craft, massive, hovering maybe 100 feet above the installation. The light was coming from its underside, from ports or windows or something I couldn't quite make out. Reese was at the blast door, trying to unlock it manually. He got it open and we all followed him out into the compound. I don't know what we thought we were going to do. We were unarmed, our weapons were in the armoury, and we had no way to access it without power. But we went outside anyway, compelled by the need to see this thing with our own eyes, to confirm it was real. It was real. Triangular, enormous, silent. The underside was covered in structures that looked technological but organic somehow, flowing into each other in ways that didn't match our engineering principles. The blue-white light poured down, bathing the entire installation, and I felt warmth on my face, on my exposed skin. The air smelled strange, metallic and sharp, like after a lightning strike. We stood there, the four of us staring up at this thing, and I remember thinking that this was it. This was first contact, or last contact, or the moment everything changed. I felt small and scared and exhilarated all at once. Reese was saying something, but I couldn't hear him over the ringing in my ears, a high-pitched tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Then it left. No gradual ascent, no engine spool up, no warning. It was there and then it was gone, shooting straight up so fast it left a pressure wave that knocked us all backward. I fell hard on the concrete, saw stars, lay there gasping while the normal desert night returned. Dark, quiet, cold. The stars were visible again, normal stars doing normal star things, and the craft was gone like it had never been there. The power came back on all at once. Lights, radar, radio, everything functioning normally. We stumbled back inside, and I looked at the radar screen. Nothing. Empty sky. Whatever had been there had vanished from the screen the same moment it vanished from the sky. Command called 30 seconds later, asking why we'd gone offline. Reese told them equipment malfunction. Everything was fine now. Problem resolved. I expected him to tell them the truth, to report what we'd all just seen. But he didn't. He ended the call and looked at us and said, "We don't talk about this. Not to command, not to each other, not to anyone. This didn't happen." We all agreed. We finished our shift in silence, logging nothing unusual, pretending the hour we'd just lived through had been routine and boring. But when I went outside again at dawn to do a perimeter check, I found evidence we hadn't imagined it. The concrete pad where we'd been standing when the craft hovered above us was covered in a fine metallic dust, silver grey, too fine to be sand. I swept some into a specimen bag, against every regulation, and kept it hidden in my personal gear. That was 34 years ago. I left the military 2 years after that night, couldn't reconcile what I knew with what I was allowed to say. Reese died in 1997. Heart attack. Never spoke about it as far as I know. The other two men I lost track of over the years. We never had a reunion, never compared notes about that night. We kept our promise to stay silent. I still have the specimen bag. The dust is still in there, unchanged by time. I've thought about having it analysed, but I'm afraid of what might happen if the wrong people found out I had it. So it sits in a safe deposit box, a physical reminder that I didn't imagine it, that something happened that night in the Nevada desert that wasn't supposed to be possible. Sometimes I wonder if we were tested, if that craft came to see how we'd react, whether we'd panic or fight or stand there in awe like we did. Sometimes I wonder if the power shutdown was deliberate, a demonstration of capability, a way of showing us how helpless we were, and sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder what would have happened if we'd tried to make contact instead of just standing there, watching. If I'd waved or shouted or done anything except freeze in terrified wonder. I never reported it officially. I never told my wife, my kids, my friends. This is the first time I've put it into words outside my own private journals. And I'm doing it anonymously because even now, decades later, I'm afraid. Afraid of being labelled crazy, afraid of men in suits asking questions I can't answer, afraid of breaking the silence Reese imposed on us that night. But more than that, I'm afraid the craft will come back, that it marked us somehow, catalogued us, and someday it'll return to finish whatever study it was conducting. I moved away from Nevada in 1992, put as much distance as I could between myself and that desert installation. But I still see it sometimes in my dreams, hovering overhead, pouring down that blue-white light, and I wake up with my heart pounding and the smell of ozone in my nostrils. And I check the windows, always check the windows, making sure the sky outside is normal and dark and empty of triangles that shouldn't exist. Chapter 5. The Abduction. I'm going to tell you what I remember, and then I'm going to tell you what I was told I should remember, and you can decide which one is true. What I remember, it was June 1995, and I was driving back to Phoenix from a consulting job in Sedona. 2-lane highway, late afternoon. The sun low but not quite setting. I was alone in the car, windows down, radio playing classic rock. I came around a curve and there was something in the road ahead. Not blocking it entirely, but enough to the side that I slowed down to look. It was a craft. Landed or hovering just barely off the pavement, I couldn't tell which. Disc-shaped, maybe 30 feet in diameter. Metallic surface that seemed to shift colours in the sunlight. There were no seams, no windows, no obvious means of propulsion. It was just there, impossible and real, sitting on a highway in Arizona like a car pulled off for a roadside stop. I should have driven past. I should have kept going, gotten as far away as possible. Instead I pulled over. I don't know why. Curiosity maybe. Or that same compulsion I've heard other people describe. The sense that stopping wasn't really a choice I was making so much as something that was happening to me. I got out of the car. I walked toward the craft. I remember the heat of the pavement through my shoes, the sound of cicadas in the scrub brush, the smell of dust and creosote. I remember getting close enough to touch it, reaching out my hand, my fingers inches from the surface. That's where my continuous memory ends. The next thing I know with certainty is waking up in my car on the shoulder of the highway, engine still running, radio still playing. The sun was down. It was full dark, stars out, and my car's headlights were cutting through the night. I checked my watch. 4 hours had passed. 4 hours. Gone. Just gone, with no memory of how they'd been spent. My gas tank was lower than it should have been for just sitting idle. I had a nosebleed, dried blood crusted on my upper lip. And when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw a mark on my neck, a small circular bruise with what looked like a puncture in the centre. I drove to the nearest hospital and told them I thought I'd been in an accident, that I'd lost time and woke up on the roadside. They checked me for concussion, found nothing. They cleaned the puncture wound on my neck and said it looked like a spider bite. They asked if I'd been drinking. I said no. They sent me home with instructions to rest and follow up with my regular doctor if symptoms developed. What I was told I should remember. Over the next few months, the dream started. Vivid, specific, consistent. In the dreams, I'm not in my car. I'm in a room that's too white, too bright, lying on a table that's cold against my back. There are figures around me, 3 or 4, tall and thin with those enormous dark eyes everyone describes. They're doing something to me. Examinations, procedures. And I can't move. I'm paralysed but conscious, watching everything, feeling everything. They communicate without speaking, thoughts pressed directly into my mind. They're not hostile, not exactly, but they're not kind either. They're clinical, detached. I'm a specimen, a subject, something to be studied. They show me things, images, visions, information I can't quite hold on to when I wake up. Stars and planets and timelines that branch and converge. Warnings maybe, promises. I don't know. Then I'm back on the table in my car and time has passed and I'm alone again. Returned to where I was taken from, with a gap in my memory and physical evidence I can't explain away. The dreams were so vivid I started to think they were memories, suppressed memories bubbling up through sleep. I found a therapist who specialised in trauma, started working through what had happened. She was careful never to suggest anything, just let me talk, Let me explore these dreams and try to make sense of them. Under hypnosis, I know how that sounds. I know the problems with hypnosis and memory, but I was desperate for answers. I recalled more details, the craft rising with me inside it. Being taken somewhere, not far, maybe just up above the cloud layer, the examination room, the figures, the procedures, hours of procedures, then being returned, placed back in my car, given the suggestion to forget, to drive home, to not speak about what happened. But the suggestion didn't take completely, hence the dreams, hence the slow recovery of memory in fragments and images that wouldn't stay still, wouldn't solidify into a coherent narrative. Here's what I know for certain. I lost 4 hours on a highway in Arizona. I have a scar on my neck that doctors say is probably a spider bite, but doesn't look like any spider bite I've ever seen. I have dreams so consistent and detailed that they feel more real than my waking memories. And I have this unshakable feeling that something happened during those 4 hours, something significant, something that changed me in ways I'm still discovering. The physical effects persisted for months. I developed a sensitivity to certain frequencies of sound, fluorescent lights, older computer monitors, certain types of electrical equipment would give me instant headaches. I'd wake up with nosebleeds 3 or 4 times a week. I lost weight without trying, dropped 20 pounds in 2 months. My sense of time became unreliable. I'd think 10 minutes had passed and it would be an hour, or I'd think an hour had passed and it would be 10 minutes. Most disturbing were the marks that appeared on my body. Not the one on my neck, that stayed, a permanent scar. But new ones would show up, small circular bruises or burns, usually on my arms or legs, sometimes on my torso. They'd appear overnight. No pain, no injury I could remember, just there when I woke up. They'd fade over a few days and then new ones would appear. I documented everything. Photographs, journal entries, medical records. I built a file of evidence that something was happening to me. Something ongoing. Because it didn't stop with that one incident on the highway. Over the next 2 years I had 7 episodes of missing time. Never as long as that first 4 hours. Usually 20 minutes to an hour. But always the same pattern. I'd be somewhere familiar, driving, walking at home. And then there'd be a gap. And I'd be somewhere else, or time would have passed and I wouldn't know where it went. Each time I'd have new marks. Each time the dreams would intensify for a few weeks afterward. And each time I'd recover fragments of memory that suggested I was being taken repeatedly, examined repeatedly, as if I were part of an ongoing study. I tried to find others who'd had similar experiences. This was the early internet era. Forums and chat rooms dedicated to UFO encounters and abduction experiences. I found hundreds of people with stories that mirrored mine. The missing time, the physical marks, the dreams that felt like memories, the sense of being tracked, monitored, and selected for something we didn't understand. But I also found skeptics who said it was all sleep paralysis, false memories implanted by therapists, the brain's attempt to make sense of ordinary experiences by filling in gaps with extraordinary explanations. And I couldn't completely dismiss that. I wanted to believe my memories were real, but I also knew how unreliable memory could be, especially under hypnosis, especially when you were desperate for answers. So I'm left with uncertainty. I know something happened on that highway in 1995. I know I lost 4 hours. I know I have scars and documented episodes of missing time and medical anomalies I can't explain. But I don't know if the memories are real, or if they're constructions, my mind's attempt to create a narrative that makes sense of the inexplicable. What I do know is that it changed me. I'm not the person I was before that June afternoon. I'm more cautious, more aware, more prone to scanning the sky and checking my watch and monitoring my body for new marks. I don't take photographs anymore because I'm afraid of what might show up in the background. I don't drive long distances alone if I can help it. And I never, ever pull over when I see something unusual on the road. The episode stopped in 1997. I don't know why. Maybe whatever study I was part of concluded. Maybe I aged out of whatever demographic they were interested in. Maybe it was never real to begin with, and my brain finally stopped generating false memories. I don't know. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up with that familiar metallic taste in my mouth and find a new mark on my arm. And I'll wonder if it ever really stopped, or if I just stopped remembering. If they're still taking me and I've learned to suppress the memories completely, to wake up with no awareness that I was gone at all, that's almost more frightening than the alternative. The idea that it's still happening, and I just don't know it anymore, that I'm still a subject in someone's study, still being examined and returned, but now without even the dreams to tell me it occurred. I'm sharing this anonymously because I still don't know what's true. I don't know if I was abducted by something non-human, or if I experienced a complex psychological event that my brain processed as abduction. I don't know if those 4 hours on the highway were the most significant 4 hours of my life, or a gap caused by something as mundane as a seizure, or a fugue state. But I know I'm not the same person I was before, and I know that whenever I see a light in the sky moving wrong, my heart starts racing and my palms sweat, and I check my watch obsessively for the next several hours, making sure time is passing normally, making sure I'm still here, still present, still in control of my own experience. 28 years later, I still don't have answers, just questions and scars, and the lingering sense that I touched something on that highway that I wasn't meant to touch, and it's been touching me back ever since. Chapter 6. The Farmhouse Lights. My grandfather owned a farm in rural Iowa, 400 acres of corn and soybeans, a white farmhouse that was 100 years old, outbuildings in various states of decay. I spent summers there as a kid, and then one full year when I was 19, helping him work the land after my grandmother passed, and he needed an extra set of hands. This was 1978. No internet, no cell phones, no satellite TV. Entertainment was a radio that picked up 2 AM stations, and whatever books you brought with you. At night the darkness was complete, the kind of darkness city people don't understand. No streetlights, no traffic, no ambient glow on the horizon, just darkness and stars and the sounds of the farm settling. I'd been there about 3 months when the lights started appearing. My grandfather's bedroom was on the ground floor, but I slept upstairs in what had been my mother's room when she was young. Small room, sloped ceiling, window that looked out over the back pasture toward a line of trees maybe a quarter mile away. The first time I saw them I thought they were car headlights, someone turning around in the field, or teenagers parking where they shouldn't be. 2 bright white lights moving slowly along the tree line, parallel to each other, maybe 20 feet apart. I watched them for a minute or two, waiting for them to resolve into something ordinary, but they didn't. They maintained perfect spacing, perfect alignment, and they made no sound. Then they rose, straight up, together, still maintaining that 20-foot separation, climbing smoothly into the sky until they were above the tree line. They hovered there for maybe 30 seconds, and then they shot away horizontally, accelerating to impossible speed in an instant, and were gone. I told my grandfather at breakfast the next morning. He nodded, didn't seem surprised, said other people had reported seeing lights over the years. He told me not to worry about it, said they didn't bother anybody. I went back to his eggs. That was the end of the conversation. But I was bothered. I started watching for them every night, sitting by my window after my grandfather went to bed, keeping vigil over the back pasture. They appeared 3 or 4 times a week, always the same pattern, 2 lights moving along the tree line, rising, hovering, then shooting away at speeds that defied physics. After 2 weeks of this, I decided I wanted a closer look. I took a flashlight and walked out across the pasture one night, when the lights appeared, moving toward the tree line. It was a stupid thing to do, walking through a dark field towards something I didn't understand. But I was 19 and curious, and I thought I was invincible. The lights were ahead of me, maybe 100 yards out, moving slowly. I walked faster, trying to close the distance, and they stopped. Just stopped, hanging in the air, about 10 feet off the ground. I stopped too, suddenly uncertain, the beam of my flashlight looking pathetic and weak, compared to the brilliant white glow of whatever I was approaching. I called out. I don't know what I said, something like, hello, or who's there? Words that felt absurd even as I spoke them. The lights didn't respond, didn't move. I took another step forward and they pulsed, both of them simultaneously, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Then they started moving toward me, not fast but steady and purposeful, closing the distance I'd been trying to close. I felt fear then, real fear, the kind that makes your legs go weak and your bladder clench. I turned and ran back toward the farmhouse, stumbling over the uneven ground, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I looked back once and the lights were following me, maintaining distance but definitely following. I could see them clearly now, not just points of light but structured objects, spherical or nearly so. with a surface that looked metallic in the glow they emitted. They were 15 feet off the ground, moving in perfect synchronization, and they were keeping pace with me as I ran. I made it to the farmhouse and burst through the back door, slamming it behind me. I went to the window and looked out, and the lights were hovering at the edge of the pasture, maybe 50 yards from the house. They stayed there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. Then they rose straight up, accelerated, and vanished into the night sky. My grandfather found me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m, shaking, drinking water, because I didn't know what else to do. I told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished he said, "They won't hurt you. They never have, but don't chase them again." I asked him how he knew they wouldn't hurt me. He said he'd seen them himself, dozens of times over the years. He said his father had seen them, and his grandfather before that. He said they'd been coming to this land for as long as anyone could remember, and they'd never done anything but observe, never interfered, never made contact beyond watching. I asked why he'd never reported it, never told anyone. He gave me a look like I'd asked a stupid question and said, "Who would I tell? What would I say? That there are lights over my field that don't belong to anything I know? People would think I was senile. Better to just let them be." The lights appeared regularly for the rest of my time on the farm. I never approached them again, but I watched them from my window, trying to understand what they were doing. They seemed to follow a pattern, covering the same areas of the property in the same sequence, like they were conducting a survey. Mapping maybe, monitoring. I didn't know. One night in late August I saw something different. The 2 lights appeared as usual, but this time they were joined by a third, then a fourth, then more. Within a few minutes there were maybe 20 lights moving over the property, all in perfect coordination, weaving patterns in the air that looked choreographed. They moved together for about 10 minutes, and then they all rose simultaneously and shot away in different directions, scattering across the sky like sparks. I never saw them again after that night, not in the remaining 2 weeks I spent on the farm, and not when I visited my grandfather in subsequent years. He said they still came occasionally, but not as often. He seemed unbothered by the change, like it was just part of the natural cycle of things. My grandfather died in 1994. The farm was sold to a corporate agriculture company that levelled the farmhouse and most of the outbuildings, turned the whole property into one massive mechanised operation. I drove by once, years later, and didn't recognise it. The tree line was gone, the pasture was gone. Everything was just flat field stretching to the horizon. I wonder sometimes if the lights still come, if they survey the land and find it changed, unrecognisable, the patterns they knew disrupted by industrial agriculture, or if they stopped coming when the farmhouse was destroyed, when the family that had coexisted with them for generations was replaced by machines and corporate efficiency. I never saw them anywhere else. Just on that farm during that year, I spent helping my grandfather. They were part of the place, woven into its history, and when the place was erased, they went with it. Or maybe they're still there and the new owners just don't look up at night, don't stand at windows watching the tree line, don't notice when physics is violated over their fields. I think about those lights more often now than I did when I was seeing them regularly. They've become dreamlike in memory, almost mythical, and sometimes I wonder if they were real at all, or if I imagined them during a lonely year on an isolated farm. But then I remember the fear I felt when they followed me across the pasture, the way my grandfather nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. And I know they were real. Whatever they were real. And they're still out there somewhere, I think, watching and mapping and conducting whatever study brought them to that Iowa farmland in the first place. Maybe they've moved on to other locations, other families, other patterns to observe. Or maybe they're still coming back to where the farmhouse used to be, looking for something that isn't there anymore, confused by the absence of what they'd been monitoring for generations. I hope they found what they were looking for. I hope their study concluded successfully, that the data they gathered meant something, served some purpose I can't understand. Because if it didn't, if they were coming all those years for nothing, if the destruction of the farm interrupted something important, then I'd carry a different kind of weight. The weight of being a part of the generation that broke a connection that had existed for who knows how long. But mostly I just remember standing at my window, watching 2 lights move along the tree line with impossible precision, and feeling like I was witnessing something ancient and ongoing, something that had been happening long before I was born, and would continue long after I was gone. A reminder that the world is stranger than we pretend it is, that there are patterns operating on scales we can't perceive, and that sometimes, if you're in the right place at the right time, you get to see behind the curtain for just a moment. Chapter 7. The Underwater Object. I was working on a commercial fishing vessel out of Kodiak, Alaska, in the summer of 2006. Deckhand position, brutal work, long hours, but the money was good and I needed it. The boat was a seiner, working salmon runs, and we'd go out for weeks at a time, living in close quarters, working in all weather, sleeping in shifts. We were about 70 miles offshore, working a productive area, nets out, waiting for the haul. It was late afternoon, the sea relatively calm, which was rare for those waters. I was on deck with 2 other guys smoking and watching the gulls circle, when the captain called down from the wheelhouse. He said something was showing up on the sonar, something big, and he wanted us to take a look. We went up to the wheelhouse and he showed us the screen. There was something below us, maybe 200 feet down, moving at the same speed we were moving. It was large, larger than our boat, which was 80 feet, and it had a shape the sonar couldn't quite resolve. Not a whale. We saw whales all the time on sonar, and this wasn't the right profile. Not a submarine, though that was my first thought. The shape was wrong, too smooth, too symmetrical. The captain slowed the boat. The object slowed with us. He changed course, turning to starboard. The object changed course, matching our turn precisely. It was tracking us, or we were tracking it, and it was maintaining exact depth and distance. One of the other deckhands, a guy named Pete, who'd been fishing these waters for 20 years, said he'd never seen anything like it. The captain tried the radio, called the Coast Guard, reported an unidentified object on sonar. They acknowledged, asked for details, said they'd look into it. We didn't hear back. The object stayed with us for about 40 minutes, moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. Then it started to rise. Slowly at first, ascending through the water column, and we could track it coming up on the sonar, getting closer to the surface. The captain brought the boat to a full stop, and we all went out on deck, watching the water. The ocean was dark grey-green, opaque, giving nothing away. But we could see a glow down there, a blue-white light coming from below, getting brighter as the object rose. The water started to churn, bubbles rising, and then we saw it break the surface about 50 yards off our starboard side. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. Disc-shaped, maybe 60 feet in diameter, metallic surface that water poured off in sheets. No seams, no windows, no obvious means of propulsion. It hovered at the surface for maybe 15 seconds, rotating slowly, and then it lifted out of the water completely, rising into the air, water streaming from its underside. We all stood there watching, frozen. Nobody said a word. The object rose to maybe 100 feet above the ocean and stopped, hanging there, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, could hear Pete breathing fast beside me. Then it tilted, angling upward and shot away. Not gradually, instantly. It was there and then it was gone, disappearing into the overcast sky so fast my eyes couldn't track it. The captain got on the radio immediately, tried to report what we'd seen to the Coast Guard. There was a long pause after he finished talking, and then the Coast Guard operator asked him to repeat his report. He did. Another pause, then they told him they'd log it and someone would follow up if necessary. That was it. No more questions, no request for additional details, just a polite acknowledgement and the end of the conversation. We pulled in the nets and found they were empty. Completely empty, even though the fish finder had shown schools in the area before the object appeared. The captain decided to move to a different location, and none of us argued. We didn't talk about what we'd seen, not that night, not in the days that followed. There was an unspoken agreement to just not discuss it. But 2 days later we had visitors. A Coast Guard cutter intercepted us, said they wanted to come aboard for a routine inspection. They sent over 4 men, 2 of them in officer uniforms, 2 in what looked like civilian clothes. They said they were following up on our sonar contact report. They interviewed each of us separately. They were polite, professional, but the questions were strange. They asked about our mental states, whether we'd been drinking, whether we'd had adequate sleep. They asked leading questions suggesting we might have misidentified a whale or a submarine, or even a boat. They asked if we'd considered that the sonar might have malfunctioned. I told them what I'd seen with my own eyes, the object rising from the water, lifting into the air, disappearing at impossible speed. The interviewer, one of the men in civilian clothes, nodded and made notes. And then he suggested gently that sometimes stress and fatigue can cause people to misperceive ordinary events. He said the human brain fills in gaps with extraordinary explanations when we're tired or scared. I insisted I knew what I saw. He smiled, thanked me for my time, and said the interview was over. All 4 men left the boat after about 2 hours, and the cutter sailed away. We never heard anything official about the incident again, but things changed after that. We started noticing other vessels in our vicinity more often than was normal for that time of year and that location. Not close enough to be obviously watching us, but close enough that we were aware of them. Sometimes we'd see small aircraft overhead, flying patterns that seemed more like surveillance than transit. Pete left the boat when we got back to port, said he was done, retiring, spending more time with his grandkids. He was only 53, another decade of good fishing years ahead of him. But he was adamant. The captain tried to talk him out of it, but Pete just shook his head and said some things weren't worth the money. I stayed for another 2 seasons, but I never saw anything like that again. Just fish and whales and weather, and the occasional submarine at a distance, clearly marked with national insignia. Normal ocean stuff. But I never forgot the way that object rose from the water, smooth and controlled and impossible, water streaming from its surface, and the way it shot into the sky like gravity meant nothing. I've read about USOS, unidentified submerged objects. There are reports going back decades, military sonar operators tracking things underwater that move too fast, dive too deep, perform manoeuvres no submarine could perform. I never paid attention to those reports before my own encounter. Now I read every one I find. The ocean is deep and dark and we've barely explored it. We know more about the surface of Mars than we know about the deepest parts of our own oceans. And if something wanted to operate on Earth without being constantly observed, where better than underwater? 95% of the ocean floor is unmapped. Something could be down there. Entire installations, entire fleets, and we'd never know. I don't fish anymore. I moved inland, work construction now, solid ground under my feet. I still dream about the ocean sometimes, about the blue-white glow rising from the depths, and I wake up with my heart racing, feeling like I narrowly escaped something I didn't understand. The captain retired a few years ago. I called him once, asked if he ever thought about what we saw that day. There was a long silence on the line, and then he said, "Every day. I think about it every day," and hung up. Chapter 8. The Repeating Dream. This account is different from the others because I can't be entirely sure it happened. The line between dream and memory has blurred to the point where I genuinely don't know which category my experience falls into, but I'm including it because whether it was real or not, it changed my life, and that change was undeniably real. It started when I was 7 years old. I began having the same dream night after night. In the dream, I'd wake up in my bedroom, but everything would be slightly wrong. The shadows would fall at impossible angles. The air would smell like copper and ozone. And there would be a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Tall, thin, with large dark eyes that caught what little light there was and reflected it back. It never spoke, never moved closer, just stood there watching me. And I'd be paralysed, unable to move or scream, able only to lie there and look back at this thing that wasn't supposed to be in my room. The dream was so vivid, so consistent, that I started to dread going to sleep. I'd lie awake as long as possible, fighting exhaustion, because I knew that as soon as I drifted off, I'd wake up in that wrong version of my bedroom, with a figure watching me. My parents took me to doctors. They said night terrors, perfectly normal in children. I'd grow out of it. They gave me strategies for dealing with nightmares, told me to think happy thoughts before bed, to keep a nightlight on. Nothing helped. The dream kept coming. Years passed. I didn't grow out of it. The dream evolved, became more detailed. The figure would approach my bed, lean over me, and I'd feel something cold against my skin. A device, maybe, or just its hand. I could never quite see clearly. There'd be a bright light, examination, the sense of being studied with clinical detachment. Then I'd be released from paralysis and I'd genuinely wake up in my actual bedroom, drenched in sweat and shaking. When I was 13, I found a book in the library about alien abductions. I read about other people's experiences and felt a jolt of recognition. The paralysis, the figure at the foot of the bed, the examination. Other people were reporting the same thing. Either I was having the same nightmares as hundreds of other people, or something else was happening. I started documenting the dreams, kept a journal by my bed, and wrote down every detail immediately upon waking. I noted patterns. The dreams came more frequently during certain times of year. Late spring and early fall. They often coincided with unusual lights in the sky, though I only made that connection later when I compared my journal entries with UFO sighting reports. I also started noticing physical effects. I'd wake up with marks sometimes, small bruises or scratches I couldn't account for. Once I woke up with a nosebleed, which I'd never had before or since, and my sense of time became unreliable on the nights when the dreams occurred. I'd look at my clock when I went to bed, have the dream, wake up and find that 5 or 6 hours had passed when it felt like only an hour, at most. The dreams continued into adulthood, less frequently than in childhood, but still regular, maybe once a month, sometimes more. I learned to recognise the signs that a dream was coming, a certain restlessness during the day, a metallic taste in my mouth, a feeling of being watched, even when I was alone. I saw therapists. I tried medication for anxiety, for sleep disorders, for anything that might stop the dreams. Nothing worked. The figure kept appearing. The examinations kept happening. And I kept waking up with the unshakable sense that something had been done to me while I slept. When I was 32, I underwent regression hypnosis with a therapist who specialised in trauma recovery. I know the problems with this approach, the way hypnosis can create false memories, but I was desperate to understand whether these were dreams or suppressed memories of real events. Under hypnosis, I described the same experiences in greater detail. I remembered being lifted from my bed, floated through my bedroom wall, which I knew was impossible, but that's what I remembered. I was taken aboard a craft, placed on a table in a room that was too white, too bright. The figures conducted their examination, communicated with me telepathically, in concepts rather than words. They showed me images, Earth from space, environmental destruction, wars, timelines branching into different futures. Then I was returned to my bed, given a post-hypnotic suggestion to forget, or to remember only as dreams. But the suggestion didn't take completely, hence the nightmares that persisted throughout my life. Coming out of hypnosis, I didn't know what to believe. Had I accessed genuine suppressed memories, or had I created a narrative my brain wanted to believe? An explanation that made me special, rather than just someone with persistent nightmares. The physical evidence was inconclusive. The marks could be explained by restless sleep, unconscious scratching. The lost time could be explained by normal sleep cycles. The sense of being watched could be anxiety, paranoia, the brain's pattern recognition system gone into overdrive. But here's what I can't explain. When I was 35, I had a dream that was different. The figure appeared as always, but this time it communicated clearly. It showed me a specific date, November 17th, and a specific location, a park near my apartment. It didn't explain why, just impressed the information on me with a sense of importance. November 17th came. I went to the park feeling foolish, expecting nothing. And I met someone there, a woman, approximately my age, who approached me and asked, "Did they send you here too?" We compared experiences. She'd had the same dreams, the same figure, the same examinations, and she'd been given the same date and location. We were both there because something in our dreams had directed us there. We found others over the following months, a network of people who'd had similar experiences, who'd been given meeting places and dates through their dreams or their conscious encounters. Some were clear abductees with missing time and physical evidence. Others, like me, weren't sure if their experiences were real or psychological. But we'd all been directed to find each other. This is what makes me think it might be real. Not the dreams themselves, which could be products of my subconscious, but the fact that I met other people through information gained in those dreams, people I had no normal way of knowing existed. That suggests something external, something coordinating these experiences across multiple people. Or it suggests we're all experiencing the same psychological phenomenon and unconsciously seeking each other out, creating patterns and connections. Because humans are pattern-seeking creatures, and we want our experiences to mean something. I still don't know. The dreams continue. I'm 47 now, and I've been having them for 40 years. They're part of my life, as regular as seasons. I've learned to live with the ambiguity, with not knowing if I'm a participant in something extraordinary, or just someone whose brain produces unusually consistent nightmares. What I do know is that the experiences, real or not, have shaped who I am. I'm more open to possibilities than I might otherwise be, more willing to accept that reality might be stranger and more complex than our default assumptions allow, more compassionate toward people who report experiences that sound impossible, because I know how it feels to carry something you can't prove and can't forget. And I know that on certain nights when the air smells like copper and the shadows fall wrong, I'll wake up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. And whether it's dream or memory or something in between, the experience will feel absolutely real. And in the morning I'll write it down, add it to the journal I've been keeping for decades, and continue living my life in the space between certainty and doubt. Chapter 9. The Phoenix Lights. I was living in Phoenix in March of 1997 when thousands of people saw something in the sky that shouldn't have been there. This is probably the most well-known mass UFO sighting in recent history. But what you might not know is that the official explanation satisfied almost no one who actually witnessed it, and many of us carried details we never shared publicly because they seemed too strange even for an already strange event. I was 28, working as a paralegal, living in an apartment complex in Ahwatukee. The evening of March 13th was clear and warm, typical Arizona spring weather. I was on my balcony around 8:30, having a beer and watching the sunset fade, when I noticed lights to the northwest. At first they looked like aircraft running lights, but something was off about their configuration. They were arranged in a V formation, 5 lights that I could see clearly, maybe more that were dimmer or blocked by buildings. They were moving slowly across the sky, completely silent, heading southeast. Other people in the complex came out onto their balconies. Someone pointed and shouted. We all stood there watching these lights pass overhead, and as they got closer, I could see they weren't separate objects. They were part of something larger, something massive that was blocking out stars as it moved. The lights were attached to a single craft, and the craft was enormous. I ran inside and grabbed my binoculars. By the time I got back out, the object was almost directly overhead. Through the binoculars I could see the structure more clearly. It wasn't a triangle exactly, more like a V or a chevron, and the surface between the lights was dark but not empty. I could see texture, panelling maybe, or the suggestion of internal structures. The object was moving at maybe 30 or 40 miles an hour, steady and level, completely silent. No engine noise, no wind noise, nothing. It passed directly over my building and I had to crane my neck back to keep it in view. It was so large that it blocked out a significant portion of the sky, and I remember thinking that if this was a military aircraft, it was unlike anything that had ever been publicly acknowledged. The lights continued southeast and disappeared over the horizon. I stood on my balcony for another 20 minutes, waiting to see if it would come back, but the sky remained normal. Other residents were talking, sharing what they'd seen, and we all agreed on the basics. Large, V-shaped, silent, flying low and slow over populated areas. I called my parents, told them what I'd seen. They were sceptical but not dismissive. Then I turned on the news and found that the phone lines were jammed with reports. Thousands of people across the Phoenix metro area had seen it. The news anchors seemed uncertain how to handle it, oscillating between taking it seriously and treating it as a curiosity. Over the following days, the governor held a press conference where he made jokes about it, had someone dress up in an alien costume. The military eventually released an explanation. Flares dropped during a training exercise at the Barry Goldwater Range. But I knew what I'd seen, and it wasn't flares. Flares fall. They drift on parachutes or descend under their own weight. These lights maintained perfect formation at a constant altitude for the entire time they were visible, which was at least 10 minutes from my location. What I didn't tell anyone, what I've never told anyone until now, was what happened 3 days later. I came home from work and found my apartment had been entered. Nothing was obviously disturbed. Nothing was stolen. But I could tell someone had been there. Small things were moved. My desk chair was at a different angle. The closet door I always kept closed was slightly ajar, and my video camera was gone. I'd filmed the lights, about 2 minutes of footage, shaky but clear, showing the V-shaped object passing overhead. I'd left the camera on my desk, planning to get the tape duplicated. Now it was gone and only the camera. My TV, my computer, my stereo, all still there, just the camera. I filed a police report. They said it was probably kids, suggested I get better locks. I didn't mention the UFO footage because I knew how it would sound. But I knew what had been taken, and why. Over the next few weeks I heard similar stories from other witnesses. Photographs gone from people's homes. hard drives corrupted. One man told me he'd filmed the object with his camcorder, and when he tried to play the tape back, it was blank, just static. The official explanation held, despite thousands of witnesses reporting something that didn't match flares. The story faded from the news. Life returned to normal. But those of us who'd seen it carried the experience with us, and some of us carried the secondary experience of having evidence removed or destroyed. I think about Phoenix Lights often, especially when new UFO sightings get explained away with thin official narratives that don't match witness testimony. I think about the coordinated effort to suppress or discredit what thousands of people saw with their own eyes. And I think about whoever came into my apartment and took that camera, how they knew I had footage, how they knew where I lived. The event was real. Thousands of witnesses, multiple vantage points, consistent descriptions. Something massive and structured flew over one of the largest metropolitan areas in the United States at low altitude, completely silent. And then the evidence began disappearing, and the official explanation satisfied no one who actually saw it. I still live in Arizona, though not in Phoenix anymore. And sometimes, on clear nights, I find myself watching the northwestern sky, looking for lights in V formation, wondering if it will come back, wondering what it was and where it came from, and why it chose to fly openly over a populated area, letting thousands of people see it, creating a mass sighting that couldn't be easily dismissed or hidden. Maybe it was a message. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was something showing us that it exists, that we're being visited, and daring us to deny it in the face of overwhelming evidence. And maybe the removal of physical evidence, the ridicule from officials, the inadequate explanations, maybe all of that is part of the test too. To see how we respond when confronted with undeniable evidence of something beyond our understanding, to see if we can handle the cognitive dissonance of knowing something is real while being told officially that it isn't. I don't have answers, just the memory of standing on my balcony, looking up at something that shouldn't exist, something that blocked out the stars, and knowing that whatever explanation was eventually provided, it wouldn't capture the truth of what I'd witnessed. And the knowledge that someone thought my 2 minutes of shaky video was important enough to break into my home and take. Chapter 10. The Grid Pattern. I need to be careful how I tell this because I signed a non-disclosure agreement, and while enough time has passed that I think I'm willing to risk breaking it, I'm still not going to include details that could identify exactly where I worked or what project I was assigned to. I was a civilian contractor doing data analysis for a military installation in the southwestern United States. This was in the early 2000s. My security clearance was adequate for the work I was doing, which involved processing radar data, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that needed flagging for further investigation. Most of what I analysed was routine, weather phenomena, civilian aircraft transponders, the occasional irregularity that turned out to be equipment malfunction. Boring work, hours staring at screens, generating reports that probably nobody read. But the pay was good and the work was steady, so I didn't complain. Then I started noticing something, a pattern in the data that repeated with statistical regularity. Objects appearing on radar at specific intervals, every 72 hours, approximately the same time of day. Always in the same general area, about 300 miles from our installation. The objects would appear at high altitude, hold position for anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, then disappear. They didn't match any flight patterns I had in our databases. They didn't have transponders. They moved in ways that suggested control and purpose, but didn't follow normal aircraft behaviour, and they appeared too regularly to be random. I flagged it. I wrote a detailed report outlining the pattern, included timestamps and coordinates, suggested it warranted further investigation. I submitted the report through proper channels and expected someone would look into it or tell me I'd made an error in my analysis, or at least acknowledge receipt. Instead, 3 days later, I was called into a meeting with 2 men I'd never seen before. They weren't wearing uniforms, but they carried themselves like military, and they had clearances that made mine look trivial. They asked me about my report. I explained my findings. They listened without interrupting, taking notes, their faces expressionless. Then they told me to stop tracking that area. They said the objects I'd identified were part of a classified project, and my security clearance didn't extend to information about it. They thanked me for my diligence, had me sign additional paperwork acknowledging I'd been read into information I wasn't cleared for, and agreeing never to discuss it. The meeting lasted maybe 20 minutes. I went back to my workstation and found that my access to historical data had been restricted. I could only see real-time feeds now, no archived radar records. The area where the objects appeared was greyed out on my displays, marked as restricted airspace not requiring civilian monitoring. But I'd already made copies. This was stupid and illegal, and could have gotten me fired or worse, but before I submitted my report, I'd backed up the data files to a thumb drive. I kept it hidden, not really sure what I was going to do with it, but feeling like the information was important somehow. Over the following months, I noticed other changes. Personnel were reassigned. The civilian contractor staff was reduced by about 30%. The installation became more restrictive, more segmented, with people working in silos and not comparing notes. I kept my head down and did my job, but I paid attention. One evening I was working late, the facility mostly empty, when I heard an alarm. Not a base-wide alarm, something localised to our building. I looked at my display and saw multiple objects appearing on radar simultaneously, all in the restricted zone. I was no longer supposed to monitor, but could still see in peripheral view on the main screen. There were at least 15 of them, maybe more, moving in formation. Perfect geometric pattern, like points on a grid. They were moving slowly, methodically, as if conducting a survey. Then they all stopped at once, held position, and began moving in a different pattern. They were rearranging themselves, shifting from one configuration to another with mechanical precision. A supervisor I barely knew rushed into the room and started shutting down displays. He told me to log off, go home. My shift was over. It was only 8 p.m, and I was scheduled until midnight, but I didn't argue. I logged off, grabbed my things, and left. In the parking lot, I looked up. It was a clear night, stars visible despite light pollution from the base. And I could see them. Lights in the sky, arranged in that same grid pattern I'd seen on radar, moving in coordination. They were high up, maybe 50,000 feet or more, but visible. Definitely visible. Other people were in the parking lot, other personnel leaving or arriving for night shifts. Everyone was looking up. Nobody was saying anything, but we were all seeing it. The lights maintained their formation for maybe 5 minutes. Then they all accelerated simultaneously and were gone, streaking away in different directions at speeds that left trails across my vision. I got in my car and drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got there, I took the thumb drive from where I'd hidden it and made multiple copies, stored them in different locations. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I also knew I'd witnessed something significant, and people seemed very invested in keeping it quiet. Nothing happened for 3 weeks. Then I came into work and was told my contract was being terminated. Not for cause, they were very clear about that. Just budget cuts, personnel reduction, thanks for your service. 2 weeks severance. I cleaned out my desk under supervision, surrendered my security clearance, and was escorted off the base. I tried to find similar work, but discovered I'd been flagged somehow. Not blacklisted exactly, but applications would get to a certain point, and then I'd receive a polite rejection. Eventually I moved into private sector work that didn't require clearance, took a significant pay cut, stopped trying to work in defence contracting. I still have the data. I've looked at it dozens of times over the years, and the pattern is undeniable. Objects appearing with regularity, moving in coordinated fashion, doing something in that airspace that required multiple vehicles working in concert. The pattern continued for months based on my data. I don't know if it continued after my access was restricted. I've thought about releasing the data publicly, but I'm afraid of the consequences. The NDA I signed had serious penalties attached, and I'm not sure what good it would do. The data is technical, requires expertise to interpret, would be easy to dismiss as misidentification or equipment malfunction. Without context, without corroboration, it's just numbers and timestamps that mean nothing to most people. So I sit on it. I keep the copies safe and updated, transferring to new media as technology changes. And I watch the sky sometimes, especially in the southwest, looking for that grid pattern, wondering if they're still there, still conducting their survey or their study or whatever it was they were doing. I wonder if I was shut down because I'd noticed something classified, but human, some exotic aircraft program that requires that kind of regular testing and coordination. That would be the reasonable explanation, and part of me hopes that's all it was. Advanced human technology, appropriately classified, nothing more mysterious than that. But another part of me looks at the speed those lights moved when they left, the way they arranged themselves in patterns that seemed more like mathematics than tactics. And I know what I saw wasn't any technology we'd admit to having. Not in the early 2000s, probably not now. And if it wasn't ours, then whose was it? And why were they coming back every 72 hours like clockwork, conducting operations in our airspace with apparent impunity? These are questions I'll probably never have answered. I'm out of that world now, working a normal job, living a normal life. But I still have the data, and I still look up sometimes. And I still remember the night I stood in a parking lot and watched 15 lights rearrange themselves in the sky, like pieces on a chessboard, being moved by a player whose strategy I couldn't begin to comprehend. Chapter 11. The Highway Patrol. My father was a highway patrol officer in New Mexico for 32 years. He retired in 2010, moved to Colorado, bought a small house in the mountains. We'd always been close, talked on the phone regularly, visited when we could. But he never talked about his work in much detail. Standard cop reticence, I thought. He'd seen things he didn't want to bring home. Then in 2015, 5 years into his retirement, he called me and said he needed to tell me something. He sounded strange, agitated in a way I'd never heard from him. I asked if he was okay. He said yes, but he'd been having dreams, memories coming back, and he needed to talk about something that happened during his career, something he'd suppressed for a long time. I drove up to see him. We sat on his deck looking out at the mountains, and he told me about a night in 1987 when he responded to a call about a vehicle stopped on a remote highway, hazards on, no visible occupants. He found the car exactly as reported, a sedan pulled onto the shoulder, engine off, doors closed. He ran the plates, local registration, clean record. He approached carefully, standard procedure, and found the vehicle empty. Keys in the ignition, purse in the passenger seat. No sign of the driver. He was calling it in when he noticed the lights. Not headlights, not aircraft lights. Lights hovering over the desert, about half a mile from the highway, blue, white and brilliant, arranged in a triangular pattern. As he watched, they began moving towards him. He got back in his patrol car, kept his hand near his weapon, though he knew it would be useless against whatever this was. The lights approached rapidly, resolved into a triangular craft that he estimated was at least 100 feet on each side. It passed directly over the highway, about 200 feet up, completely silent. And as it passed over him, his patrol car died. Engine, radio, lights, everything cut out at once. The craft stopped above the abandoned sedan. A beam of light shot down from its centre, illuminating the car. My father sat in his dead patrol car watching this, terrified, but unable to look away. The beam persisted for maybe 30 seconds, and then a figure rose up into it. Human-shaped, but he couldn't make out details. Just a silhouette lifting from ground level, up into the craft. The beam cut off, the craft accelerated away at impossible speed, and his patrol car came back to life. He sat there for several minutes trying to process what he'd witnessed. Then he got out and checked the abandoned sedan. Still empty. Still no driver. The purse was still on the passenger seat, but when he looked inside, he found the driver's license and saw a woman's face, mid-30s, smiling in the photo. He called in the vehicle, requested backup, and waited. 2 hours later, another unit arrived with a woman in the passenger seat. Same woman from the license photo. She was disoriented, confused, had no memory of the last 4 hours. She said she'd pulled over because she felt dizzy, and the next thing she knew, she was being walked along the highway by a deputy sheriff who'd found her 2 miles from her car. My father asked her what happened. She didn't know. He asked if she'd seen any unusual lights. She looked at him strangely and said no. He didn't push it. He helped her get her car started, followed her home to make sure she arrived safely, and filed a report that mentioned nothing about lights or crafts or beams. He said he'd responded to an abandoned vehicle and the driver had been located, disoriented but safe. 2 days later he received a visit at the Highway Patrol Office. 2 men in suits, federal agents they said, though they showed identification too briefly for him to verify. They asked about the abandoned vehicle call. He gave them the sanitised version from his report. They asked if he'd seen anything unusual. He said no. They told him that sometimes patrol officers working long hours see things that aren't there, that stress and fatigue can cause hallucinations. They said if he ever did see something unusual, it would be better not to include it in official reports. For his career's sake, for his credibility. They were polite, but the message was clear. My father kept quiet. He worked another 23 years, retired with commendation, and never talked about that night. But he couldn't forget it. He'd wake up sometimes from dreams about the beam of light, about the figure rising into the craft, about the woman's confused face when she was returned with no memory of where she'd been. He told me all of this sitting on his deck in Colorado, and when he finished, he started crying. I'd never seen him cry. He said he'd failed that woman, failed to report what really happened, failed to push for answers. He said he'd been a coward, protecting his career instead of doing what was right. I told him he'd done what anyone would do in that situation, that he'd been threatened implicitly, if not explicitly. But he said that wasn't the point. The point was that something had happened to that woman, something she had a right to know about, and he'd participated in keeping it from her. He'd let fear and pressure turn him into an accomplice to whatever cover-up was in place. He died 2 years later, sudden heart attack while hiking. I found his journals after we cleaned out his house, years of sporadic entries, and that incident appeared multiple times. He'd written about it obsessively, trying to remember every detail, questioning whether he'd really seen what he thought he'd seen, going back and forth between certainty and doubt. There were other entries too, other incidents during his career where he'd seen things he couldn't explain. Lights over the desert, strange crash sites, vehicles found abandoned with occupants never located. A pattern of strangeness that he'd documented privately while filing sanitised official reports. I tried to find the woman from the 1987 incident, thought maybe she deserved to know what my father had witnessed. But the records were too old, privacy laws too strict, and I didn't have enough information to locate her. She's out there somewhere, probably living a normal life, probably unaware that she lost 4 hours one night in 1987, that she was taken and returned, that a highway patrol officer watched it happen and said nothing. I kept my father's journals. I've read through them multiple times, and they paint a picture of someone who saw things regularly in that empty New Mexico desert. Things he couldn't report, couldn't explain, could barely admit to himself. He wasn't alone either. He mentions other officers who'd seen things, who'd compare notes quietly, who understood the unspoken rule. Don't report what you can't explain. Don't risk your career for testimony that no one will believe or officially acknowledge. The highway patrol is still out there. Officers working long night shifts on remote roads, watching the desert, seeing things they won't put in their reports. And people are still getting taken, still losing time, still being returned with gaps in their memory and physical evidence they can't account for. And the system that's supposed to protect and serve them looks the other way, files sanitised reports, and maintains plausible deniability. My father carried the weight of that knowledge for 32 years of active duty and 5 years of retirement before he finally told someone. That weight contributed to his death, I think. The stress of knowing, of having failed to act, of being complicit in something he didn't understand but knew was wrong. I'm telling his story now because he can't, because those journals deserve to be more than just private documentation of unacknowledged events. Because maybe the woman from 1987 will read this somehow and remember, and something will click, and she'll know what happened to her that night, even if she can never prove it. And because other officers are still out there, still seeing things, still filing sanitised reports, still carrying the weight of what they've witnessed in silence, maybe one of them will read this and know they're not alone, that others have seen what they've seen, that the pressure to stay silent doesn't make the experiences any less real. Chapter 12. The Recurring Visitation. I'm 53 years old and I've been visited regularly since I was 6. I don't mean occasionally, I mean regularly, with a frequency and consistency that makes me think I'm part of some ongoing study, some long-term project that began in childhood and continues to this day. The first memory I have is from 1976. I was 6 years old, sleeping in my bedroom in suburban New Jersey, when I woke up to blue light streaming through my window. The room was full of figures, 3 or 4 of them, tall and thin with those oversized heads and dark eyes everyone describes. They weren't threatening exactly, but they weren't friendly either. They were clinical, detached. They picked me up from my bed and I couldn't resist, couldn't scream, could only watch as they carried me toward my window. The window didn't open. We went through it somehow, through solid glass and wall, and I was outside, floating upward toward a light above my house. I remember looking down and seeing my neighbourhood, the street, the houses, everything getting smaller. Then I was inside something, a room that was too bright, too white, and they were examining me, taking samples maybe, using instruments I didn't recognise. The details are hazy, but the feeling is clear. I was being catalogued, documented, studied. Then I was back in my bed, morning light through my window, my alarm going off, time for school. But I had marks on my arm, small circular bruises, and a nosebleed that had dried during the night. I told my parents I'd had a bad dream. They said everyone has bad dreams and sent me to school. The visits continued. Not every night, but often enough. Once a month, maybe more. Same pattern. Blue light, figures in my room, paralysis, being taken somewhere. Examination. Return? I learned to recognise the signs. The feeling of being watched in the hours before, the metallic taste, the sense of dread that would build through the evening. By the time I was a teenager, I'd accepted it as part of my life. I didn't talk about it. Who would I tell? What would I say? But I documented it privately, kept a journal hidden in my room, marked every visit with a date and whatever details I could remember. When I was 18, I moved out, went to college 3 states away, thought maybe distance would break the pattern. It didn't. The visits continued in my dorm room, in apartments, wherever I lived. They found me. Or maybe they'd tagged me somehow, marked me, and distance didn't matter. I tried everything over the years. Medication, therapy, sleep studies, electromagnetic shielding in my bedroom. Nothing stopped them. The visits persisted with clockwork regularity. Every 3 to 4 weeks, regardless of where I was or what precautions I took. In my 30s, I found a support group. Others who had ongoing contact. Not one-time experiences, but repeated visitation over years or decades. We compared notes. The patterns were similar. Frequency, methodology, the sense of being part of something long-term. Some people thought we were chosen for specific traits. Others thought it was genetic, that families were studied across generations. Nobody knew for certain. I got married at 35. I told my wife before we moved in together. I needed her to know what she was signing up for. She was sceptical but supportive. Said we'd deal with whatever came. The first time it happened after we were married, she woke up when the blue light filled our bedroom. She saw them. She saw me being floated out of bed. She tried to move, to scream, to help. But she was paralysed too. Could only watch as they took me. When I was returned 2 hours later, she was still awake, still frozen. When the paralysis lifted, she burst into tears, hysterical, terrified. I held her and tried to explain it was normal. This happened to me regularly. I always came back. But normal wasn't the right word, and we both knew it. She tried to cope with it. She really did. But after the 3rd or 4th time witnessing it, watching me be taken while she was helpless to intervene, it broke something in her. She developed severe anxiety, couldn't sleep, jumped at every sound. We tried counselling, but how do you counsel someone whose trauma comes from watching their spouse be abducted by non-human entities on a regular basis? We divorced after 3 years. Amicable, if you can call it that. She said she loved me, but couldn't live with the reality of my situation. I understood. I didn't blame her. Not everyone can adapt to sharing their life with something unexplainable and unstoppable. I've been alone since then. Dating is impossible. How do you explain to someone that you're regularly visited by entities you can't stop or avoid? The few times I've tried to tell people, they either think I'm insane or they're terrified and leave. So I stay alone, live alone, deal with this alone. The visits continue. I'm 53, and they've been happening for 47 years. That's over 500 visits by my conservative estimate. Over 500 times I've been taken, examined, studied, and returned. I have scars all over my body, a catalogue of marks from procedures I only partially remember. I've lost chunks of time, years of poor sleep, relationships that couldn't survive the weight of this reality. But I've also learned things. During the examinations, during the periods of paralysis when they're working on me, sometimes they communicate. Not in words, but in concepts, images, information pressed directly into my mind. I've seen things I can't fully understand or remember, timelines, possibilities, warnings about environmental collapse and human trajectory. Sometimes I think the study isn't just about cataloguing us. Sometimes I think they're trying to teach us something, show us something, prepare us for something. Or maybe that's just how I cope with it, creating meaning from trauma, finding purpose in violation. Maybe they're just studying us like we study lab rats, and there's no higher meaning, no message, no purpose beyond their own curiosity. I don't know if it will ever stop. I'm 53, and it shows no sign of slowing. Will they still come when I'm 70? 80? Will they visit me in the nursing home, float me out of my bed while the night staff makes rounds? Or is there an end point, an age limit, a conclusion to the study? I've made peace with not knowing. I've adapted to a life where privacy is an illusion, where autonomy is conditional, where every few weeks I'm reminded that I'm not in control of my own existence. It's not a good life, but it's mine, and I've learned to find what joy I can in the gaps between visitations. Sometimes I wonder what they're learning from me, what data I provide that's valuable enough to sustain this study for nearly 5 decades. What makes me worth the effort of tracking and retrieving and examining over and over across different homes, different states, different phases of my life? I'll probably never know. They don't explain and I can't ask. I'm just a subject, a specimen, a data point in some vast catalogue of human experience. And when I'm gone, when I die, will they move on to someone else? Is there already a child somewhere experiencing their first visit, beginning their own decades-long participation in this study? Is this how it works, generation after generation, an ongoing programme of observation and documentation that spans human lifetimes? These are the questions I live with. These are the thoughts that occupy me in the hours before a visit, when I feel the dread building and I know what's coming. And these are the questions that linger after, when I'm back in my bed with new marks and missing time and the certainty that it will happen again in 3 or 4 weeks, as regular as the moon's phases, as predictable as seasons. I'm telling you this because I want someone to know. If something happens to me, if one of these visits goes wrong, or I don't come back, I want there to be a record somewhere that I was part of this, that this happened to me, that I spent most of my life as an unwilling participant in something I couldn't stop or understand. And I'm telling you in case you're experiencing something similar, in case you wake up to blue light and figures in your room and you think you're alone, you're going crazy, you're the only one this is happening to. You're not. There are others of us scattered and isolated dealing with this privately because public acknowledgement is impossible, because the world isn't ready to accept that this happens, that people are taken regularly, that we live among you carrying this burden in silence. If that's you, if you're reading this and recognising yourself in my story, know that you're not alone. Document everything. Trust your experience. Don't let anyone convince you it's not real, not happening, just dreams or delusions. You know what you experienced. Honour that knowledge even if you can never prove it. And if you're someone who hasn't experienced this, who reads this as entertainment or curiosity, just remember that somewhere tonight, someone is lying in bed waiting for blue light to fill their room, knowing they can't stop what's coming, knowing they'll be taken again, and they're terrified and alone, and carrying a reality that most people will never believe or understand. That's the weight we carry. That's the life we live. And we're still here, still functioning, still finding ways to exist in a world that has no framework for acknowledging what happens to us. That takes a strength most people never have to find, and a resilience most people never have to develop. So when you look up at the night sky and wonder if we're alone, remember that the answer is no. We're not alone. They're here, they've always been here. And some of us know that more intimately than we ever wanted to. Chapter 13. The Closing Sky. I want to end with something quieter. Not a dramatic sighting or a traumatic abduction, but a moment of strange beauty that stayed with me for reasons I still can't fully articulate. This was 10 years ago, late summer, and I was camping alone in Montana. No profound reason, just needed solitude and wilderness and distance from routine. I found a dispersed camping area near a lake, set up my tent, spent the day hiking, and settled in for the evening. The sunset that night was spectacular, all orange and purple across the water, and I sat on a fallen log watching it fade. As full dark came on, the stars appeared in their thousands, so many that the Milky Way was clearly visible as a river of light across the sky. I've seen dark skies before, but this was something else. This was the sky humans saw for millennia before electric light. The sky that inspired myths and navigation and wonder. I was sitting there, overwhelmed by the scale of it, when I noticed something strange. A section of the sky was darker than the rest. Not clouds. There were no clouds. Just an area maybe 10 degrees across where no stars were visible, as if something was blocking them. As I watched, the dark area moved, slowly, deliberately, passing in front of the star field. It had a shape, roughly circular, and it was large enough that it took several minutes to transit across my field of view. Whatever it was high enough and large enough to obscure hundreds of stars as it moved. There was no sound, no lights, just this absence moving across the night sky, this void where stars should be. I watched it traverse from west to east until it passed beyond my sight line, blocked by trees. Then the stars in its wake became visible again, appearing as the obstruction moved on. I sat there for a long time after, trying to understand what I'd seen. A low cloud wouldn't have had that defined shape or moved that steadily. An aircraft wouldn't have blocked that many stars. You'd need something massive at high altitude, something the size of a football stadium or larger. And there would have been navigation lights, engine noise, something besides just the absence. But I wasn't afraid. That's what I remember most clearly. With other encounters I've heard about or experienced, there's usually fear. That primal recognition that you're in the presence of something you don't understand and can't control. This was different. This felt gentle somehow, careful, as if whatever was up there was deliberately not making itself threatening, deliberately avoiding the display of lights and sounds that might frighten someone watching from below. It felt like being allowed to witness something passing through, something that normally would remain invisible, and that allowance felt like a gift, a moment of grace. A glimpse behind the curtain, offered gently, without trauma, without demands, without changing anything except maybe my sense of what's possible and what moves through our skies unseen. I never reported it. What would I say? I saw a dark patch move across the stars. That sounds like nothing, like clouds or imagination, but I know what I saw, and I know the feeling it left me with. Not fear, not confusion, but a strange peace. A sense that the universe is vast and strange, and full of things moving through it that we rarely see, and that sometimes, if you're quiet and alone and looking up at the right moment, you get to witness one of them passing by. That's what I want to leave you with as these accounts come to an end. Not terror, not trauma, but wonder. Yes, there are frightening encounters, experiences that leave scars physical and psychological, but there are also moments of strange beauty, of connection with something beyond our usual experience, of being reminded that we're part of something larger and more mysterious than our daily lives acknowledge. The sky's full of things we don't understand. Some of them come close enough to see, to interact with, to change us. Others pass by at a distance, content to remain mysterious, visible only as absences or silhouettes or lights moving wrong. And we're down here looking up, trying to make sense of it all. Trying to understand our place in a universe that keeps showing us we barely understand anything at all. These accounts, these memories, these experiences, they're all we have. They're how we make sense of the inexplicable, how we process encounters that don't fit into our framework of reality. We tell them to each other quietly, carefully, knowing most people won't believe, hoping a few will understand. And maybe that's enough. Maybe bearing witness, sharing these moments, acknowledging that the strange and inexplicable happens regularly to regular people. Maybe that's all we can do until the day when these experiences are acknowledged more broadly, when the evidence becomes undeniable and the conversation shifts from if to why and what now. Until then, we keep watching the sky. We keep noting the lights that move wrong, the objects that defy physics, the missing time and the strange marks and the memories that won't stay buried. We document what we can, we share what we dare, and we carry the weight of knowing something that most people dismiss as impossible. The sky is not empty. It never has been. And those of us who've looked up at the right moment, who've seen what we weren't supposed to see, who've been changed by encounters we can barely describe, we know that. We carry that knowledge forward, even when it's heavy, even when it isolates us, even when it makes us question everything we thought we understood about our place in the universe. So if you're lying here in the dark, listening to these accounts, wondering if any of it is real, I'll tell you what I tell myself on sleepless nights when memory and doubt wrestle in the darkness. Trust your experience. Honour what you've witnessed. Don't let anyone convince you that the extraordinary is impossible when you've seen it with your own eyes. And keep watching the sky, not with fear, but with openness, with curiosity, with the understanding that we're part of something vast and strange, that the universe is full of mysteries we're only beginning to glimpse, and that sometimes if we're patient and present and willing to see, we're granted brief windows into realities beyond our normal perception. Those windows close, the moments pass, but they leave us changed, marked by the experience of witnessing something that shouldn't be, but is. And we carry those moments forward, quiet testaments to the strangeness that moves through our world, waiting for the day when maybe we'll understand what we've been seeing, what's been visiting, what's been watching us all along. Until that day, rest easy. The strange will still be strange tomorrow. The mysteries will still be mysterious. And we'll still be here looking up, wondering, witnessing, and sharing our stories in the dark where they can be received without judgment, held without demand for proof, honoured simply as experiences that change the people who lived through them. Sleep well. Wherever you are, the sky is vast and full of wonders. And somewhere up there, something is looking back down at us, patient and persistent, and waiting for the moment when we're ready to truly see what's been in front of us all along. The stories will still be here when you wake.